Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I am finally getting back into the red tent. My deepest apologies for anybody who has been following along. I actually don't even know how long it's been since I was able to read. So I apologize for that. Life has been busy and it's just what it is. So you may need to go back and watch the previous chapter. I will link the playlist in the description for those of you that may just be joining, or if any of you guys would like to get back to just a little reminder of what had happened in the last chapter. Was a big one, so I think I actually divided it into 3 different videos. Chapter 3 is also another long chapter, so I won't get through all of it today. We'll see how far I can get into it. But so just a reminder, I am reading the 10th edition, so if any of you are following along, I haven't seen any of the other editions, but I'm assuming there's probably some changes within the different editions. And yeah, so just, I encourage you to come at this with an open heart, an open mind. There is, I will remind you, there are things in here that, polygamy, basically pedophilia, where men have married really young girls. That was supposed to be the norm of the time, which I just find very weird and wrong. But it is part of the book. It is part of the story. So again, I do struggle with a lot of the names and the places, so just bear with me on that. But yeah, let's get into it. So I'm on chapter 3. Okay. Rachel grew quiet. She stopped attending Ina and did not rise from her blanket until Leah shook her and insisted she helped the rest of the women in their work. Only then would Rachel spin or weave or work the garden, but wordlessly and without a smile. Jacob could not rouse her from her sadness. Rebuffed by her unbending silence, he stopped calling her to him at night. Her sorrow became a presence so bleak, even the babies began to avoid their pretty auntie. Rachel was alone in her own black night. Bilhah saw Rachel's despair and went to her where she was huddled on her blanket. The little sister lay down beside Rachel and held her as gently as a mother. "Let me go to Jacob on your behalf," said Bilhah in a whisper. "Let me bear a son on your knees. Let me be your womb and your breasts. Let me bleed your blood and shed your tears. Let me become your vessel until your time comes, for your time will yet arrive. Let me be your hope, Rachel. I will not disappoint you." Rachel made no reply. She said nothing for a long time. Bilhah wondered if her sister had slept through her words or whether her offer had offended. Bilhah said she waited so long for a reply that she began to wonder whether the words that had been gathering in her heart had not even passed her lips. Bilhah was accustomed to silence and waited. Finally, Rachel turned and kissed her, gathering the small woman close to her body, taking comfort from her warmth. "And the tears she shed were not bitter or even salty," said Bilhah, "but sweet as rainwater." Excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. Bilhah knew that even though her offer to Rachel was made out of love, it also served her own heart's desire. She understood Rachel's longing because it was her own. She was well into her childbearing years. Oh, sorry, we'll see how long I can get into this. I apologize. The sounds of love-making in the close world of our tents had roused her at night, leaving her shaken and sleepless. Attending her sister's births made her wish to become part of the great mother's mystery, which is brought with pain and repaid with an infant's sparkling smile and silken skin. Her breast ached to give suckle. Honest Bilhah revealed every corner of her heart to Rachel, who knew the emptiness her sister described. They wept together and slept in each other's arms. The next morning, Rachel sought out Jacob and asked that he sear a child upon Bilhah in her name. This was not a request, for it was Rachel's right to have a child of Jacob. There was no other permission to seek or get. Jacob agreed. Why would he not? Leah nursed her last son, and Rachel's back had been turned to him for long months. So that night, on the full moon of a chill month, Bilhah went to Jacob and left him the next morning, no longer a maiden, though not a bride. There was no henna for Bilhah's hands, no feast, no gifts. There were no 7 days to learn the secrets of Jacob's body or the meaning of his words. When the sun rose the next day, Jacob returned to oversee the flocks, and Bilhah went to Rachel and recounted every detail of her night to her sister. Years later, she told it to me. She wept when she entered Jacob's tent, and she was surprised by her own tears. She had wanted to be initiated into the mystery of sex, to open her legs and learn the ancient ways of men and women, but she was lonely walking into her husband's tent alone, without sisters or ceremony or celebration. She had no right into the rituals of dowered bride, and yet she missed them. Jacob was kind, Bilhah remembered. He thought my tears were a sign of fear, so he held me like a child and gave me a woolen bracelet. It was nothing, no precious metal, no ivory or anything of value, just a woven braid made from leavings. The kind of thing shepherd boys would make aimlessly, sitting under a tree in the heat of the day. Out of tufts of wool caught are brambles are brown to the ground. Jacob had twirled the brown, black, and cream-colored strands against his thigh until he had enough to plait it into a braid. He thought the simple thing from his arm and cut it in to fit hers. Such a sad little nothing for a bride price, but she wore it throughout the first year as Jacob's third wife, until it fell apart one day and she lost it without even knowing where. Thinking of her bracelet, Bilhah smiled, and her forefinger traced the place where a bit of string had tied her to Jacob. He comforted me with that poor gift without a word, and I stopped crying. I smiled into his face, and then, oh, I was so bold, I could hardly believe it was me. I put my hand upon his sex and laid his hand upon mine. He lifted my skirt and massaged my belly and my breast. He buried his face between my thighs, and I almost laughed out loud at the shock of pleasure. When he entered me, it was as though I had fallen into a pool of water. It was as though the moon were singing my name. It was all I had hoped for. I slept in Jacob's long arms, cradled like a child for the first time since my mother held me. May her name be set in the stars. For that night alone, I loved Jacob. Bilhah told all of this to Rachel. It was not easy for my beautiful aunt to hear it, but she insisted that Bilhah leave nothing out, and the younger sister repeated her story as often as Rachel asked to hear it, until the memory of Bilhah's consummation became Rachel's own memory, and her sister's pleasure and gratitude became part of her own feelings for Jacob. The day after Jacob knew Bilhah for the first time, he was called away to do business with a trader in Karshemit, a journey of 2 days. Bilhah suffered in his absence, for she was eager to lie with him again. Rachel suffered in knowledge that Jacob had found happiness with Bilhah. Leah suffered because she felt so distant from her sisters' lives. Zilpah watched it all, said little, and sighed much. Excuse me. Until Jacob's return, he brought Rachel a beaded necklace and spent his first night with her. Leah was still nursing, so he called Bilhah to him again, often during the next months, especially when Rachel was away attending a birth. Jacob and his third wife spoke very little when they were together, but their bodies joined in straightforward postures, yet yield them both pleasure to release. Jacob said, "I gave him peace," said Bilhah with great satisfaction. Bilhah conceived. Rachel greeted the news with kisses and rejoiced with her sister. As the months passed and her belly grew, Rachel coddled her and asked her to name every sensation, every twinge, every mood. Did Bilhah know at that moment life had taken root? Was the tiredness of pregnancy felt in her knees or in her eyes? Did she crave salt or sweet? The two of them shared a blanket during Bilhah's pregnancy. The barren woman felt the slow swell of her sister's belly at the gathering heaviness of her breast. She watched the flesh stretch in tan bands across the brown belly and thighs, and noticed the changing color of her nipples. As the child grew in Bilhah, draining her of color and energy, Rachel bloomed. She grew soft and round along with Bilhah, and the hollows that sadness had carved in her cheeks disappeared. She laughed and played with her nephews and the other children of the camp. She baked bread and made cheese without being asked. She lived so deeply inside Bilhah's pregnancy that during the 9th month, Rachel's ankles grew swollen. And when the time came for the baby to enter the world, Rachel called Ina to be the midwife, so she alone could stand behind Bilhah during her travail and hold her and suffer with her. Happily for Bilhah, the birth was as simple and quick as the pregnancy had been difficult. After a morning worth of panting and groaning, she stood on the bricks while Rachel crouched around her. Bilhah's elbows rested on Rachel's splayed knees, and it was as if the two women shared a room for the awful hour when the baby pushed his way out. Their faces strained and reddened together, and they cried out with a single voice when the head appeared. Ina said it was as though the two-headed woman had given birth, and declared it one of the strangest things she had seen. When the boy was delivered and the cord severed, Rachel held him first, her eyes streaming, for a long time, or so it seemed to Bilhah, who bit her tongue and waited for the moment she would embrace the first issue of her womb. Bilhah's eyes followed Rachel's every movement as she wiped the blood from the baby's body and checked to see that he was whole and unblemished. Bilhah barely breathed as the moments passed and her arms remained empty, but she said nothing. By law, this son belonged to Rachel. Excuse me. Years attending so many births had made Rachel's heart tender, and with a great sigh she placed the boy in Bilhah's arms, where he lifted his eyes to his mother's face and smiled into her eyes before he took to her breast. At that instant, Rachel woke from her dream and saw that the baby was not her child. Her smile faded and her shoulders sagged, and her hands clawed at her girlish breast. Ina had told Rachel that if she let the baby suck there long enough, he would find milk within her, and she could become his milk mother. But Rachel had no faith in her body's ability to sustain life. Putting a child to nurse on an empty breast would cause suffering to her son, who was not hers at all, but Billa's. Besides, Billa might sicken and even die if she did not empty her breast, for she had seen that happen. And Rachel loved her sister. She hoped the baby at Billa's breast. I think that's supposed to say helped. Would be as good a man as his mother was a woman. Oh, sorry. She hoped the baby at Billa's breast would be as good a man as her mother was a woman. Rachel left Billa with her son and went to find Jacob. She told her husband that the baby's name was Dan, which means judgment. To the woman who bore him, Dan sounded sweet, but to her in whose name he was born, it was a bitter ring. The sight of the baby in Billa's arms day after day shattered Rachel's confidence again. She was only the aunt, the bystander, the barren one, but now she did not rail against heaven or plague her sisters with temper. She sat too unhappily to weep under the acana tree sacred to Anina. Where the birds gathered at dawn, she went to the Asher and prostrated herself before the wide-mouthed, grinning goddess and whispered, "Give me children, or I will die." Jacob saw her suffering and gathered her to him with the greatest tenderness. And after all the years, all the nights, all the miscarriages and broken hopes, Rachel found delight in his arms. I really had no idea why Leah and Billa sought out Jacob's bed before those days